I hope you all enjoyed the comments by Adam Zubin and our previous panel, which I thought was just superb. We're going to try to live up to that standard with this panel on the nuclear aspects of the agreement. My name's Barbara Slavin. I'm a senior fellow here. I manage our program on Iran, and I'm delighted to be partnering with Bill Luers and the Iran Project, and also with other centers at the Atlantic Council. And thank you all again for coming. So we've heard a little bit of a discussion about how the Iran deal will affect trade with Iran, investment in Iran, and now we are going to discuss the nuclear agreement in detail. Just on Tuesday, the board of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, cleared the last hurdle to full implementation of the agreement by having the Board of Governors pass a resolution that closes the file on an investigation of Iran's previous possible military dimensions of their nuclear program, but does not give Iran a get-out-of-jail-free card if there are indications of problems in the future, and I think that's important to say. Adam Zubin listed all of the elements of the deal that Iran is now obliged to fulfill in terms of removing centrifuges, sending out stockpiles of low-enriched uranium, ripping the core out of its heavy water reactor and filling it with cement. And the Iranians are optimistic that they can get all of these steps done by the end of January, when we will have implementation day. To discuss these issues and possible challenges, likely challenges ahead, we have what I hope is, again, a really stellar and very well-balanced panel of experts. First, we're going to have Kelsey Davenport, who's Director for Nonproliferation Policy at the Arms Control Association. I think this is her third time speaking here. She provides research and analysis on the nuclear and missile programs of Iran, North Korea, India, and Pakistan. She joined the Arms Control Association in 2011 and previously worked at a think tank in Jerusalem. And she is a rising star in the nonproliferation community in Washington. She's going to give us an overview of implementation so far and challenges ahead. And then we're going to hear from David Albright, who I've known for many years as a journalist and as an Iran-ophile and Iran expert. David is the founder and president of the Institute for Science and International Security, or as it's known on Twitter, the good ISIS. And he has written numerous assessments of nuclear weapons programs throughout the world. He testifies frequently before Congress, and he's co-authored a number of books. One of them has been very helpful to me, I would say, in my work on the issue, and that's called Peddling Peril: How the Secret Nuclear Arms Trade Arms America's Enemies. Sorry. Peddling Peril: How the Secret Nuclear Trade Arms America's Enemies. Afterwards, we'll turn to another old friend, Syed Hossein Mousavian, for his thoughts on Iran's implementation strategy and possible hurdles. Hossein is a research scholar at Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. He's a former Iranian diplomat. He served as ambassador to Germany, headed the Foreign Relations Committee of Iran's National Security Council, and he was a spokesman for Iran in its prior nuclear negotiations with the Europeans from 2003 to 2005, which was how I first got to meet him in Tehran. And he's the author of two books, the most recent being Iran and the United States, an insider's view on the on the failed past and the road to peace. And finally, our cleanup hitter, the wonderful Jim Walsh, who's been here several times in the past also. Jim is, well, he will talk about anything he pleases, I told him, as the cleanup hitter. But I hope he will also touch on the U.S. political climate in terms of the survivability of the deal, which was also alluded to a little bit on our previous panel. Jim is an expert in international security at MIT, at their security studies program. He focuses on international security, especially related to nuclear weapons in the Middle East. He's also a frequent witness on Capitol Hill, and he's one of a handful of Americans who's traveled to both Iran and North Korea for talks with officials about nuclear issues. I have too. And before coming to MIT, he was executive director of the Managing the Atom Project at Harvard and a visiting scholar at the Center for Global Security Research at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. So, Kelsey, let's start with where we are in terms of implementation, what remains to be done, and some of the challenges that you see going forward.
Great, thank you, Barbara. And thank you so much to the Iran Project and the Atlantic Council for having me today. It's an honor to be here. Since the nuclear deal was formally adopted on October 18th, Iran has really jumped into implementing its side of the bargain. And we know that both through what the IAEA has reported, and we can also glean some additional information through some of the statements that Iranian officials have made, and also officials from the other P5+1 countries, in particular Russia. So the first real indication that Iran was beginning to take steps to fulfill its obligations came in the quarterly report that the International Atomic Energy Agency issued in November, about a month after the deal was formally adopted. And the IAEA noted there that Iran had removed just over 4,500 centrifuges at that point, of which about 160 were their advanced IR2M centrifuges, and about 250 of those centrifuges were removed from the Fordow facility. So clear indications that Iran was beginning to take steps to reduce the number of centrifuges down to the 6,104 that it's permitted under the agreement. Now, Iran did at one point halt removing centrifuges from Fordow and its advanced centrifuges. Iran has said it's going to resume removing those machines and hopes to complete removal within the next month. Now, the real time-consuming element for Iran in this case is removing the IR2M centrifuges. We know from what Iranian officials have said that they're spending 2 to 3 more time removing each of those IR2M centrifuges than they are sort of the IR1 centrifuges. Now, the other element that came out of the IAEA report is that the IAEA is beginning to take steps to implement the increased monitoring and transparency measures that are spelled out under the deal. Iran also notified the IAEA that it would implement its additional protocol, which will expand IAEA access in Iran once the deal is fully implemented. Now, the additional measures that Iran agreed to include things like continuous surveillance at uranium mines and mills, continuous monitoring of centrifuge enrichment levels, and other provisions that will give the agency a clearer picture of what Iran is doing in the future in terms of its nuclear activities. Now, we can glean a great deal more information about what else Iran has been doing that isn't reflected in the report from some of the statements made by Iranian officials over the past month and also sort of Russian officials. One of the big steps that Iran will need to take is shipping out its stockpile of low-enriched uranium. That's the uranium enriched to less than 5%. And most of that is going to go to Russia. Now, that stockpile had not been removed as of the last IAEA report, but Iranian officials have since said that the stockpile is at the port in Bushehr and that they are ready to send it out. Russian officials have said they expect to receive it within the next 12 days. Oh. And I hope I'm not stealing Ambassador Moll's thunder, but he confirmed that it was likely that the stockpile would reach Russia by the end of the month at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee this morning, where he was testifying. So it looks like by the end of the year, the stockpile could be removed from Iran, putting it under the 300 kilogram limit that's required of it in the deal. Now, Iranian officials have also reported that in return, they have received yellow cake from Russia, which is what Iran negotiated for in terms of after giving up its low-enriched stockpile. Russia has said it was going to give Iran 40 tons of natural yellow cake uranium. It's unclear if all of that has been delivered. The Iranian officials have not been specific, but they said that there is Russian yellow cake now at Esfahan. So clear progress on that area as well. Another area where we've seen some progress is on the redesign of the Arak reactor. The US, China, and Iran have worked together on a design to modify the Arak reactor so that it will produce far less weapons-grade plutonium after the core is removed. The P5+1 have formally endorsed that plan, and just in the past 2 days, Iranian and Chinese officials have been meeting to actually discuss moving forward, because the Chinese are going to be assisting Iran on the ground with that conversion. So another important step forward. What Iran has yet to do is remove the core of the Arak reactor and fill the chambers with cement to disable it. That's something that Iran committed to do in the agreement, but the Supreme Leader has said that that will not happen until after the PMD file was closed. So hopefully what happened on December 15th at the IAEA will open the door for Iran to fulfill that commitment. Now, looking ahead, there still are some challenges. One of the things that the IAEA report noted, and that David and his organization have done excellent work identifying, is the stockpile of 20% enriched material that is still within Iran that will need to be removed from the country before the deal can be fully implemented. Iran is allowed to keep some of that in the form of fuel plates, but the scrap, the material in process, that all needs to be removed or blended down. And that could pose sort of both a technical challenge and there's still a little bit of an open question about where it's going to go. It seems like that will be shipped out to Kazakhstan, but as of yesterday, Kazakh officials had not formally announced that they intended to take the material. So completing that process still could take some time. Another area that may impede this process is the actual installation of the monitoring equipment that the IAEA will need to bring to Iran. There's a great deal of equipment involved in both the continuous surveillance of the uranium mines and mills and the centrifuge production areas, the completion of inventory, and then the installation of the monitors to ensure that Iran's enrichment levels do not rise above the 3.67% agreed to in the deal. And at the press conference on December 15th, Imano thought that it may be possible for the IAEA to complete sort of its end of that bargain by the end of January, but there was still some doubts just in terms of the sheer amount of time that it will take for the IAEA to install that and then verify all of the rest of Iran's commitments. So those are still sort of two challenges going forward. But if you look at what Iran has said about implementation now happening sometime in January, the IAEA and the United States are coming around to a shorter time frame than they originally expected. So I think within the next few months, we can get to the point of implementation day where the IAEA will be able to certify that all of these steps have been taken. After that, a whole host of new challenges emerge. I won't get into them here. We can certainly discuss them during the Q&A. But I think it is critical, particularly within the first months and years of the deal, that when the IAEA has concerns about technical issues related to implementation or concerns that Iran might be nibbling around the edges or trying to cheat, that Iran fully complies with both the IAEA's investigation and some of the partial compliance that Iran has tried to get away with in the past is not tolerated. That ensures that we won't end up in a death by 1,000 paper cuts situation where Iran moves into a gray zone by sort of nibbling away in small ways around the edges of the agreement. But it's important to remember when you're looking at this deal that all of the elements form an entire package. And when the deal is implemented, Iran will be significantly further away in terms of the time it would take for them to obtain enough material for a nuclear weapon, and under a much more scrutinous monitoring and verification regime that will ensure to the highest degree possible that any cheating will be quickly detected. So in sum, once we reach implementation day, we need to remain vigilant. But in general, I think that the agreement certainly provides the international community with more assurance that Iran's nuclear program is entirely peaceful.
That's great. Thank you, Kelsey. David, I want to ask you about a couple of things. First, I wanted to quote Mark Fitzpatrick of the IISS. I don't know if he's here today, but he said, and I think you quoted him the other week at your event at Arms Control Association, that we can eliminate the P from PMD. So it's no longer the possible military dimensions, but Iran did indeed have military dimensions to its program, and the IAEA, I think, has verified that. And David, you've written about this. You've also written about other aspects of verification going forward. So what are your major concerns in terms of implementation of the JCPOA? And do you think it's possible to adequately verify this agreement, given that although the IAEA has bureaucratically closed the MD military dimensions file, there are still some questions about what Iran did in the past?
Oh, okay, thank you. No, and thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. I should say we're neutral on this deal. I mean, we've been advising both sides, and we still see it as highly contentious and prefer not to take a position. We're not against it, we're not for it, but we are spending a considerable amount of time and will spend a considerable amount of time continuing to analyze it, looking at provisions, but feel that it's not in our interest to do objective analysis by taking a position, given just how contentious it is in Washington. I would say much less so in Europe. What here can turn into almost a food fight, in Europe one can laugh about the differences. So I mean, the deal is not perfect by any means. There's a lot of trouble in it, you know. And I'll just I guess out of balance, focus on a few of those that in line with what Barbara's asked. I mean, I'll start with the PM. I still call it PMD out of habit, so forgive me.
Okay.
But maybe I'll try to shift in my talk. I think the IA should be congratulated on reaching the conclusion that there was a structured nuclear weapons program up to 2003 and that parts continued, and they have evidence of work up to 2009 and have no evidence after that. It doesn't say that the program did not continue, it just says they have no credible evidence of work after that. And I think that they were under pressure from all sides to reach a conclusion, given that Iran's cooperation was not expected. The IA did not want to just use member state information that it had acquired over many years, and it had tested, and actually can't talk about all the methods now, but had used many methods to establish the credibility of the information, and that they were not forgeries, as has often been some of the criticism from outside. But in fact was quite reliable information, and I think their conclusion speaks to the quality of the intelligence information and the fact that, as far as I know, only Iran has objected to the conclusion of taking the P out of the PMD. No one expected a confession from Iran. I mean, I personally thought when Rafsanjani started opening the door to this by his admission about a program back in the long day or the days long past, that could open a door to a further admission. But I think the process was set up not to expect a confession, or let me just be frank, honesty on the part of the Iranian regime. I think I think at my institute we've had some real problems. It's not the conclusion of the IA. We recommended that. I had a meeting personally with Amano almost a year ago where that was our position with him, was to argue, just, do your best to say there's a program. Where I see the problem is in the access that Iran denied to the IA, both in terms of sites and people, and the level of non-cooperation on the part of Iran. That I unfortunately have to conclude that this process and the Board of Governors resolution has weakened the IEA. That it's going to make it harder for it to do its job in the future. And it really, again, I'll emphasize, it's over access to military sites in Iran and access to people and an expectation of cooperation on the part of Iran if there is a confrontation. What happened, unfortunately, is Iran did deny access to the IA, and you can read the December 2nd report to see examples of it. They tried to control access to Parchin in the sense that the IA inspectors weren't allowed to take the samples, And I think any investigator would say it's much better to be there in person to take samples than to have it done through a camera process. Also, the IA didn't go into all the buildings. There's a building in the north of the site. It was also a suspect site. That was not visited at all. The IA came back with positive results on environmental sampling, that there was uranium found at the site, but they can't say it's from any nefarious activity at the site. It could have been contamination brought in by somebody from a nuclear site. Normally, you would expect the IA to go back and check it out. And so I think the fact that they're not under this current process is damaging to the IA's credibility and legitimacy. And so what I would expect, and I don't have I can't parse Amano's comments. He speaks in very vague, mysterious ways often. And, but that I would expect that the IA, under the additional protocol, will seek to go back and try to, and so I would say the PMD issue as a roadmap issue is closed as the agenda item on the Board of Governors, but the issue of past work is not closed, and part of the reason is that the IA, in its verification efforts to arrive at a completeness decision about a state's declaration, always considers the past. It can't move forward in a sense and know what's going on now. And to remind you, the IA has not given a clean bill of health to Iran.
Right.
It has not said it is a peaceful nuclear program. It can only do that after a further investigation under the additional protocol, and that, I think, will involve looking back at some of these past activities. It'll just inevitably run up against those, and I would hope that Iran will accept that. I'm not optimistic. I mean, one of the toughest issues in the negotiations was IA access to Iranian military sites. And as far as I've known, Iran hasn't changed its position. It bent a little bit on Parchin, and then these two of the three workshops near the old International Tehran Airport on the issue of the reentry vehicle manufacturing. But those weren't. Parchin was unsatisfactory, and the workshops were never seen as that important. Now, there's another part of this too, where one of the great things about the JCPOA is that it restricts Iran's ability, or let me start again. Iran is committed not to work on aspects of nuclear weapons, high explosives, neutron initiators, computer codes. I remember discussions last summer with mostly European negotiators. There was resistance to putting this in, not because they didn't think it's a great idea. I mean, it's for many of us that is implicit in the NPT, but there's been challenges by some that somehow you can model a nuclear explosive, you can test the components under an NPT and it's okay. I disagree with that strenuously, but these conditions were meant to clarify that for Iran. No, they're not okay. But the reason they didn't want to put them in is because they aren't verifiable in many cases. It's very tough to know if someone's working on high explosives related to nuclear weapons development. Now, if Iran doesn't allow access to military sites, which is its stated policy in general, you can't verify it at all, because these sites, these activities aren't going to take place at the Atomic Energy Organization. They're going to take place at military sites. And so you have another motivation for the IA, and I would say for the international community, to keep pressing Iran to allow IA access to military sites. JCPOA does a great job of having monitoring, and Chelsea laid out several of them on declared sites, regular activities. It's still untested on the whole issue of undeclared nuclear activities. And I think the PMD debate was a victory for Iran and a loss for us. And I think now we have to compensate to try to find a way to put pressure on Iran in support of the IA so they get the adequate access to sites where you have to worry cheating could happen, and you have to worry, or in a sense, important in terms of deciding, is this treaty, or I can't call it a treaty. I'm not sure what to call it. It's not an agreement, really, is it? But something, is it verifiable? So let me stop there. I have some other comments. There was a kind of an interesting Senate hearing today. Well, let me just add this real quickly. Is that
Yeah,
right?
sure, because many of us in this room didn't get to
Yeah.
watch Steve Mull at the hearing.
It's interesting. I mean, Senator Corker. What did he call it? I don't agree with the characterization, but on both sides, I don't agree with most of the characterization of this issue. But he called it the U.S. is creating a permissive environment for Iranian activities. So you had 2 missile launches, one of which the Security Council sanctions group has said is a violation of existing Security Council resolutions. You have Iranians, officials saying they're going to pick and choose which parts of the Security Council resolutions they're going to abide by. Missiles is not going to be one they're going to abide by. You had Ambassador Mull making a statement he's probably going to correct today at the luncheon, that somehow they're not going to be able to stop, or they don't expect to stop Iranian violations in the missile area, or that Iran will proceed in any case. Ask him about it. I'm sure he would love to take back a little bit of what he said, probably by accident. So the bottom line is though you have enforcement on the agenda right now. Is this UN Security Council resolution, the new one, and then the Security Council resolutions that are still enforced today, will they be enforced? And how is the administration going to react to that? And then how is that going to change the political dynamics, maybe tip the scales among some Democrats who base their support of this deal on robust enforcement of the both nuclear deal and the missile bans that are in the Security Council resolution?
David, thank you very much. That's perfect. Hussein, I'm going to turn to you, but let me just say that, this nuclear agreement is a bet on the future more than it is an investigation of the past, as I think we know. And I remember Yukio Amano speaking in Washington a year or so ago, where he said this would be a political decision on the part of the IAEA board as to whether to close the PMD file. And indeed, it was a political decision. And the bet is that what I think you experts call the long pole in the tent, namely fissile material, heavy enriched uranium to make a nuclear weapon, that Iran would be kept from ever having enough fissile material to make a nuclear weapon. So Iran can do all the modeling it likes, right? But without the fuel, you can't make a bomb. So Hussein, how do you think Iran is doing in terms of implementation? What do you see as the challenges from the Iranian side?
Thank you, Barbara. First of all, let me thank the Atlantic Council and the Iran Project for invitation and managing such an excellent event. On Iran and the implementation, the first point is the fact since November 2013 to date, Iran has fully, precisely, timely implemented all commitments made within every agreement made with the P5+1. There is no single failure confirmed by the IAEA, confirmed by the P5+1. Therefore, I believe Iranians, they would continue the same policy. However, there has been, and still there is, a difference between the nature of opponents or oppositions to the deal in Iran and in the US. The opponents in Iran, they are not against every commitment Iran should make within the NPT. They are opposing the JCPOA, or they were opposing because of Iran's commitments beyond non-proliferation treaty. And they were arguing Iran is the only country committing to tens of measures beyond non-proliferation treaty. But the opponents in Washington, I don't believe even today, they don't care about NPT, even the measures beyond NPT, whether Iran have accepted all commitments within NPT or beyond NPT. Their issue is about regime change, attacking Iran, all these issues. Therefore, there is a major difference between the oppositions we have in Washington and in Tehran. I was here in the US during the debate in the Congress, and I decided to stay while it was in summer. To watch the opposition, it was a very serious opposition. The administration did a big job. A lot of friends here, they did a great job to help. Then I left to Iran in October to see the opposition, the Iranian parliamentary debate. I really, frankly speaking, found the opposition to the deal in Iran was much more tense and comprehensive compared to Washington. Despite this fact, at the end, I believe Iranian leadership managed in a better way compared to the US leadership on the JCPOA, because Iran, the parliament, the National Security Council, the government, the administration, and the leader, they all blessed the deal at the end, despite of 3, 4, 5 months. Therefore, between legislative, the administration, the leadership, the National Security Council, there is a consensus on the implementation of the deal. That's why I'm not really worried about Iran to implement correctly the future commitment. I'm worried about the situation in Washington because the Congress still is objecting, doesn't like it. And everyone here knows the influence and impact of AIPAC, the foreign intervention like Israelis, like Arabs, like Saudi Arabia in the US foreign policy. We have no intervention in Iranian foreign policy. No country can intervene in Iranian foreign policy. But here you can see the role of Saudi Arabia, Israel, I mean, the lobbies. And so that's why I'm afraid here about the implementation here in Washington. Then, therefore, definitely there would be consequences in Iran. To my understanding, the most difficult part of the implementation for Iran was the PMDs issues. Because they were supposed to give access to military sites. And they are very sensitive, not because of the nuclear issue, because they believe the US, the Israelis, they are after spying the conventional arm capability of Iran to attack Iran, because all options are on the table. That's why they want to know everything about the Iranian conventional arms capability. That's why they are very, very sensitive about any inspection to the military sites. But thanks God, this is over. And I believe IAEA and Iran, on the roadmap, managed access. They could finish the inspections the IAEA required to close the PMD files. But on the resolution, the IAEA report, David says, when you said, thanks to IAEA, confirmed Iran had nuclear weapon program, it is not really the case. I would like also to thank IAEA, because it says IAEA has found no credible indication of the diversion of nuclear material in connection with the possible military dimensions to the Iranian nuclear program. There is no evidence of any diversion of nuclear material. What the IAEA says, although Iran is objecting and is protesting even this statement, the IAEA says prior to 2003 and a little bit to 2009, Iran has had research. It is about research, David. It is not about weaponization. And every proliferation expert knows very well, under NPT non-proliferation, research is not prohibited. There is no ban by the NPT to do research, even on weaponization. And the reason is very clear. Today, we have in Germany, for many years, it is not new, they have a facility They are doing research on nuclear weaponization. IAEA knows, European knows, American knows, IAEA also visited. There is no objection to the facility already exists and is working in Germany for research on nuclear weaponization. Research is not illegal under the maximum accusation. After 14 years fighting an Iranian nuclear issue is research, which is not illegal. And it is clear, even Iran has not even diverted 1 milligram of nuclear material to weaponization. Therefore, I believe the IAEA has confirmed what Iran has been saying for 14 years, that we have never had nuclear program, I mean the practical, on the missile also, I really believe the IAEA statement resolution was a political one, not a technical one. And the reason is clear. I mean, the experts like Robert Kelly, 35 years, US veteran on nuclear weaponization. He was director of the IAEA on Iraq, South Korea, Libya weaponization for many, many years. He says there is no single new information on the IAEA report about possible military dimension issues. There is nothing new. It is just everything is still based on what the US intelligence service gave some years ago. That's it. I believe this is a political statement making possible to close it, make it clear there is no diversion on Iranian nuclear program. It is very clear. Saying there has been some research in order to keep the credibility or the legitimacy for putting all these sanctions pressures for 10 years on Iran. Because even if they don't say there is no research, then everyone would ask, why you sanctioned Iran? Why you took the file to United Nations Security Council? For what? And at the end, the PMD report, the resolution is exactly like JCPOA, a political compromise between Iran and the world powers to close the file.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Hussein. Jim, I want you to react to what you've heard. Also give us your sense of what the hurdles are going to be to implementation. And one other aspect also, if you could touch on this, there are ways to, there's leverage that the P5+1 has with Iran that goes beyond snapback of sanctions. For example, the international community is going to be very involved in redesigning Arak, as Kelsey pointed out, in repurposing the underground facility at Fordo. Is there leverage that could be exerted there in terms of how much cooperation, how quickly these projects move?
Thank you, Barbara. It's an honor to be here with you and with this distinguished panel, and I want to thank the Atlantic Council and my colleagues at the Iran Project, particularly Bill and Iris, for all their hard work to put this great group together. I look out in the audience and I see friends, and I see many of you could be up here instead of me, but ha, I'm the one who's up here. I didn't mean that. I really didn't mean it. You know, I think it's important, you know, we're the nuclear panel, sanctions panel, we're the nuclear panel, and since the focus is on nuclear weapons, I took note this week of something that was said that was important about nuclear weapons. I just want to quote it directly. It's from Donald Trump on this past debate. He said, quote, "I think to me, nuclear is just the power. The devastation is very important to me. I don't know what that means, but I think it is important."
That was his response when he was asked about the triad, which he had
Yes.
never heard of, but
Yes.
never mind.
The devastation is very important to me. So anyway, I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. I have a clock on me, so don't worry about it. I think one thing to keep in mind here, and it's easy to forget, is by the time implementation day comes, most of the heavy lifting on nuclear is done. If it's not done, there is no implementation day. Right? Now, we can talk about whether sanctions relief will be full and sufficient, and different challenges we might have. And of course, there will be other sorts of problems on the nuclear side. But unlike the sanctions side, most of the nuclear heavy lifting happens before implementation day. So when that day comes, which is a month from now or 2 months from now, that will mean Iran will have completed the vast majority of obligations it has under this agreement with respect to nuclear. Right? This is not it's not an agreement that's implemented reciprocally in phases, where they do a little nuclear and they get a little sanctions relief, and they do a little, no. So I really see my role on panels diminishing tremendously over the course of the next 12 months. I mean, things could go wrong, but again, we'll be mostly there. And then the question will be not getting there as much as will we fall back. And so let me talk a little bit about what that means. Now, I think most of the discussion in Washington, 99% of it is Iran's going to cheat. And it's just a matter of when, and it's a matter of how. Or they'll cheat a little bit, or they'll cheat a lot, or they'll do both, or they'll wait and implement the agreement. And then they'll, so it's all about intentions. I think it's worth pointing out that when we've judged the intentions of others with respect to their agreement obligations, we often use process metrics. We say, is the other country moving quickly on their obligations? Do they seem to be doing so in a thorough manner, or is it reluctant implementation? And I think, and we've had that. We've had reluctant implementation with Iraq. We've had reluctant implementation with other actors. But by every characterization I've heard, Iran is moving faster, not slower, on its implementation of its nuclear obligations. In fact, there was worry within the U.S. government that they might be moving too fast. Remember that in the early days in October, that they might move so fast we might not be ready on our side. But the fact is, it's not on these measurements, nothing is a smoking gun, nothing tells you with certitude. But the fact that they're working so swiftly and so comprehensively to finish early should be an indication of their intentions. Certainly the opposite would be an indication, right? If they were dragging their feet and quibbling about definitions and all the rest, we'd all say, well, that shows that they're doing this in bad faith. Now, there may be some asymmetry here, but I think it counts as some evidence. And so I also look at problems that might emerge that are irrespective of intent. And there are those, and maybe we should spend a little more time worrying about those. The first time you do anything, it's hard. And there's a lot of stuff in this agreement that we're doing for the first time. So I expect that there'll be problems. Like every time I try to do something new, it's always a problem. And I expect they'll have problems too, whether it's the procurement channel or other particular protocols, administrative arrangements, what to do when something that has language in the agreement is vague, what's permissible, what's not permissible. And I expect that will be areas to be resolved. There will be problems in that. Anytime you do something new, there's a problem. But I'm encouraged, we do have at least 2 years of empirical evidence here. That's the Joint Plan of Action, the interim agreement, right? And we had problems with that. We had Iran feeding uranium, I think it was to IR-5 at one point, right? So, and is that a violation? Well, what happened? The parties, as often happened during the U.S.-Soviet days when they had treaty issues to implement, they sat down and they resolved the problem before it ever rose to a level of concern. So I expect we're going to have those sort of problems, but we should expect that. There are also going to be technical issues. David's pointed out, others have pointed out, Iran was slow to meet some of its deadlines under the interim agreement, the JPOA, because they were having trouble building the technologies that would have allowed them to have converted their material to a less suspicious or dangerous form. So again, there'll be, Iran is good at some parts of the fuel cycle, it's less good at others, so I expect we'll run into some technical issues along the way. There'll be bumps here. I think both sides are going to do really well at things that they have to do on their own. So Iran dismantling centrifuges, I bet they're going to do a great job of that. And we, working on sanctions relief, issuing regulations. I don't know how the sanctions rule will go because that'll depend on independent parties, private actors, businesses. But, you know, I heard this morning the Treasury is ready to go. So on things that are their own responsibility, both sides are probably going to do a pretty good job. There are things where they're going to have to do stuff together, and that's going to be a little more difficult. So again, the procurement channel or other things where they have to sit down, building the Arak reactor is going to require some negotiation, some, you know, so there are those things, and those will probably be more difficult. But I'm going to conclude. I'm over my time. And I have things to say about PMDs. I'm happy I'm sitting between my two good friends here.
That was
it allows me to say, you're both wrong, you know, and that I'm a moderate. I'm a moderate. I don't think PMD has very little relationship to anything going forward, and I think this is about implementing the agreement we have. You never get a perfect, complete report on any state's weapons programs. There's stuff we'll never know about the U.S. program. We'll never know about the South African program. Even if we interviewed every person we wanted to, do you think they'd talk to us? Right? So perfection is not the measure here.
Okay.
And it has to be related to some objective going forward. I do think the agency in elliptical language does conclude that Iran had a nuclear weapons program prior to 2003. But so again, I'm sort of in the middle on this. And I don't think, in conclusion, that the IAEA is damaged whatsoever as a result of this process. I've heard that line a long time. I've been at this for more than 20 years, and I've heard, well, this is going to damage the IAEA, and that's going to damage the IAEA, and this is going to damage the IAEA, and it's never come true. I actually think that this agreement will be a hallmark for non-proliferation going forward. All the agreements say it can't be used as a precedent, but it is a precedent.
Yeah.
And we're going to have stronger regulations and rules of the road for nuclear behavior in the future. The agency is going to be stronger. It's going to prove its value if it hasn't already. So I'm more optimistic than some of my colleagues about how this moves forward.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You hit it out of the park as expected. I want to ask David just one more question before I open it up to all of you. David, you've heard what Jim had to say, what Hussein had to say. I've been operating for the last, 15 years as a journalist and an analyst on the assumption that Iran could build a nuclear weapon if it wanted to, and it wouldn't take it very long, that it knows how. So the key thing is, will it get the fissile material? And as far as I know, no one has ever found highly enriched uranium in Iran except on some contaminated equipment that came from Pakistan a long time ago. Why are you so concerned about the testing, the modeling that Iran did in the past or might continue in the future when the key thing is to prevent Iran from getting highly enriched uranium?
The highly enriched uranium, plutonium are certainly the long poles in the tent, but they're
Right.
not the only poles. And the understanding, I think it's a fairly common understanding of Iran's program, is just that they started their work on weaponization, nuclear weaponization, quite a while ago, and it was long before they would have any fissile material. And so when the IAEA says there's no diversion of the material up to 2003, that wouldn't be surprising at all, given they didn't even have any
Right.
highly enriched uranium or even much enriched uranium. The only enriched uranium they could have had would have been produced in a parallel military program by that point in time, and a little bit produced in a civil program. So there wasn't, the issue isn't so much diversion of material, it's the development of the capabilities to build weapons. The internal IAEA report that I know leaked to AP several years ago, the IAEA analyst in that said that Iran knew enough because of its work through 2003 that it could build a crude fission weapon.
Right.
And so the IAEA didn't say they had all the elements of that on the shelf. They certainly didn't say they had the fissile material to do it, but that they had moved their knowledge and experience quite a ways down the road. Thank God the international community intervened in 2002 and 2003 because it really brought these efforts to a halt. And so I think the lack of diversion to me is really underlying that as a statement that the international effort was successful in '03 and was able to force Iran to shut down a lot of its activities. And that's really what the intelligence information shows. Now, why does this matter? Well, it matters in the sense of, has this program been dismantled or has it been put on the shelf? I mean, I was just in Korea last week, and we do work on technical cooperation with people in the government, and South Korea had gotten caught, in a sense, with its hand in the cookie jar, and decided to reveal that. I don't think the work was necessarily part of the nuclear weapons effort, but it did open up quite a bit, and it opened up in ways that Iran has never done in this recent go-around. I think Iran opened up in '03, '04 in ways that would be comparable on the gas centrifuge program, but in this recent round, it didn't open up. But one of the things I learned there was the people involved at the Nuclear Institute in this secret work had actually been involved in South Korea's earlier nuclear weapons program, and that they had the program, it's a long time ago, exposed by the U.S., shut down under pressure. But that some of these people had ended up at the Nuclear Research Center and had started these, what really were almost unauthorized programs, but you have to wonder in the back of their mind, was their motivation the hope that a bomb program could resurrect itself? And that, to bring it back to Iran, we know very little about the people who were involved in these efforts up to '03 and afterward. The IA had almost zero access to them.
Yeah.
What are they doing? I mean, one could make an argument that some of the activities after '03 were made by a very angry Fakhrizadeh who didn't like the idea that most of the program had been shut down and had every intention using military money to keep parts of that program alive. And so I think the IA does need to kind of keep an eye. That was also done in South Africa. The IA goes back to old nuclear weapons facilities in South Africa. Even recently it's done that. There was a big effort to get to know the South African nuclear weaponeers. I've met many of them and interviewed many of them. Again, Iran didn't come close to what South Africa did.
Well, let's point out that Iran lost 5 nuclear scientists who were assassinated over the years, presumably by Israelis or Israeli agents. So it had perhaps another reason to keep these people away. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but not from the IA. I mean,
That's a matter of perspective.
Yeah. Is that the reason then? Is that an excuse
Well,
to do it?
Iranians say that they're worried that there are intelligence people in the IAEA who will identify their scientists and they will then become targets. So I only say what they say.
Yeah, but if Iran has turned the corner, why would anyone target them? I mean, seriously. I mean, if Iran has turned the corner.
Oh, come on, David. You're not that naive.
No. I think Israel, if it was Israel that killed these people, made a huge mistake, and that it has consequences. But it hasn't been happening recently, and I think that I don't think that will be sufficient to say we're going to just create huge black spots in the Iranian program that are going to raise questions about the verifiability of this deal.
Okay.
Well, can I offer one just very briefly on this? One, not everything you don't know necessarily has a relationship to verifiability. You don't have to know everything to verify, and there's some things you'll never know. That doesn't mean you can't verify an agreement. And then the second thing I would say is, and I agree completely with David, if we want to maximize our knowledge and interaction with Iranian atomic scientists, which we do, then this agreement will do that, right? Because we'll have more interactions with them. We'll have Chinese on the ground and Russians on the ground, probably no Americans on the ground. But there's going to be on cooperative nuclear projects around Iraq and around other issues. We're going to be talking and seeing these people on a regular basis more than we ever have before.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me open it up now to your questions. And wait for a microphone and state your name. And Mr. Wisner, right in the front row. Welcome.
Frank Wisner. Hussein, you made a flat and categoric statement that the NPT permits the design of nuclear weapons. Research on nuclear weapons. Jim, David, do you agree with that?
I don't. I mean, and not at the level. I mean, again, the IA hasn't been that transparent about what it knows. I mean, you know, we're a research organization. We're determined to increase transparency. I've seen many of the details of what the IA was, the information given, what they checked out, and it's way beyond what I think would be construed as like some academic sitting down and thinking about how a nuclear weapon works. It was a structured effort with lots of sub-projects that was looking at many, in fact, all the aspects of developing and eventually making a nuclear weapon. So I would not call that permitted under the NPT.
You know, I'm not an international lawyer, and though I pretend to be one, and no, I don't. And I think language in the NPT, which is really the foundational document here, so it depends on what the language in the treaty is ambiguous in different areas. So you have disagreements, for example, on whether there's a right to enrich. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but as a policy person, I take the position, contrary to our friends and allies in Germany and Japan and elsewhere, that there is not a right to enrich. And I come to that conclusion based on sort of the core principle of the NPT, as I view it as a policy person, is that it's supposed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, prevent and oblige the nuclear weapon states to give up the weapons that they have. Oh, that other part that we forget.
Can I add one?
Yeah, I want Kelsey to come in.
And in the same way, I find for this, using analogous reasoning, without looking to the NPT language itself, it's hard for me to imagine a document that's supposed to get rid of and prohibit nuclear weapons that would at the same time allow you to do things very close to having nuclear weapons. So as a policy matter, I would say.
Kelsey, I wanted to ask your opinion on this. Does it prohibit it?
I mean, I agree largely with what David said. I do think that it prohibits it, particularly as part of a program that was intended to develop nuclear weapons, which Iran clearly had. I mean, this was not a single scientist on a sketch pad. I mean, this was an organized effort. And when you look at it in conjunction with Iran's other activities, building Fordo in secret, some of the work that was done on the Shahab 3 reentry vehicle, I think it is quite clear.
Yeah. Hussein, did you want to say something?
See, again, here we are coming to the to Iranian intention. There is nothing really to gauge the intention in NPT. After 2003, Americans always, they were telling us, look, you don't have right to enrich because there is nothing in NPT to recognize enrichment. We were telling them, look, we have the US, they are doing enrichment in your land. Europeans are doing, Japanese are doing, Brazilians are doing. Why everyone is doing is legal, only for us is illegal. Ultimately, they accepted. Research, you would not find a single word on IAEA status, regulations, and NPT banning research. Intention, we would fight about our intentions. This is different. And I said, I have an example today. Germany has a research weaponization working for many years and today is working. If it is illegal, why nobody is talking about it? Why IAEA does not close it? Why there is no resolution? Intention is different. We have our differences about our intentions.
Yeah. I'm sorry, this is for the older people in the audience. There's an old Tom Lehrer song I can't resist. Plagiarize, let no one else's work evade your eyes, but always please remember to call it research. That's a bad Russian accent, by the way, so my apologies to the Russians in the audience.
Can I add one thing about this weapons question?
Yeah.
Can I add one quick thing?
Sure.
I promise. In the investigation in Switzerland of the AQCON network, it turned out that Tinners, who were some of the major players, had nuclear weapons design information on their computers. The U.S. took the position supported by the IA and then supported by the Swiss government. The possession of the Swiss government of these seized nuclear weapons designs violated the NPT. So it was actually in the designs in the hands of criminals that then they took possession of, they had to destroy or turn over to the IA because it was interpreted in Europe as a violation of the NPT.
David, but you know, it was during my time. When IAEA asked about P2, Iran gave a bunch of information, everything they had. After a while, IAEA, they came to Iranians, they said there is a drawing inside the documents, many boxes, about nuclear weaponization. Iran said it was Iran who gave the IAEA. It was not the U.S. intelligence.
Yeah, on the metallurgy document.
Whatever,
yeah,
I
from
mean,
18
they got a
yeah.
big package.
Okay, truce. Questions? Let's see, the gentleman all the way back there with his pen in the air.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexandre Bilodeau. I'm with the Canadian government. I work with foreign affairs on issues of non-proliferation and disarmament. Just a couple of short questions. One is regarding the modalities of complementary access under the implementation of the additional protocol. My understanding is that the modalities are quite specific in the case of the additional protocol with Iran, and I wonder whether you could maybe elaborate more on those modalities and what it would entail in terms of giving the IAEA the access it needs to some facilities where it suspects that maybe some activities are undeclared activities are taking place.
Casey, why don't you take a stab at that?
And the
Sorry, you had another question?
Yes, the other one, briefly, sorry, is with regards to the PMD issue. It was made clear by the Iranians that they would not move on meeting their upfront commitments until the PMD file was closed. This, in fact, as far as we understand it, was not part of the JCPOA. Is there a concern or is there a risk, perhaps, that other non-related JCPOA issues could be used by Iran to influence their outcome, threatening not to move ahead on implementation of the JCPOA, as we saw with the PMD issue? Thank you.
For your second question, I think that's highly unlikely, since the Iranians have made it clear that they want to get this done as quickly as possible so they get sanctions relief. But on the other question, Kelsey, let me turn to you first.
Sure. Well, based on what we've seen in the JCPOA and what is listed in the model additional protocol, if the IAEA has concerns about illicit activity, it can request access from Iran to access undeclared sites to investigate these activities. And the access is typically supposed to be granted in 24 hours, but oftentimes there is stalling. So what the JCPOA put in effect was a time-bound process for Iran to allow the IAEA access. And the Joint Commission can get involved if the IAEA does not feel that it's getting the access that it needs. Now, in the additional protocol, and I think that this is something that has been missed sometimes in the debate here in Washington, is that when the IAEA raises a concern about about wanting access, a concern about an illicit activity, it can request access simultaneously if it is concerned that a country may take steps to try and obfuscate the evidence or sanitize a site. So this idea that after requesting access, Iran could then take steps to try and sort of throw off the IAEA to hide evidence, can be overcome if the IAEA sort of requests access, at the same time. Within sort of the access provisions to undeclared sites, particularly military sites, Iran will be able to dictate this, but ultimately it's up to the IAEA to say whether or not it's satisfied. And one of the things that I think was important about the resolution passed on the 15th was that, the December 15th, was that the board emphasized that Iran needs to not only comply with the JCPOA, but specifically mentions the access requests and provisions. So the board highlighting that, I think, also continues to sort of draw attention to the importance of those areas.
Can I ask one follow-up? Has this joint commission, which is going to monitor implementation, been set up?
The discussions are ongoing. I mean, meetings have begun. There is still some work that is being done to work out the details of some of the working groups, particularly on procurement. I think David may have more details on that. In terms of how some of the procurement is working out, but
the who will supervise the procurement channel, the allowed dual-use items that Iran can bring in.
Yes, but the Joint Commission has met several times already to work out some of the modalities of the working
So it exists.
Groups. It exists.
And do you know how many people are on it, or from which countries? Or
well, all of the P5+1 countries are represented. Iran is represented. The EU is represented. I think one of the interesting questions, though, will have to do with how the EU plans to use its vote on the Joint Commission. If the 3 EU countries, France, Germany, and the UK, split their vote, that I think could put the EU in a difficult position. Or will the EU actually, in the event of a contentious vote, poll all of its member states before voting? So I think there are some interesting questions there that remain to be resolved.
Those are questions we can pose to the French ambassador, perhaps, who will be on the panel this afternoon. David?
Yeah, I think the pushing against the envelope, I think, and the PMD issue of, we won't move forward until we close the file, is an example of that. The missile tests are really an example of that. And I think the illicit procurement, we do a lot of work on illicit procurement here and abroad and by Iran. And right after the JCPOA was signed, Iranian representatives started showing up at our classified defense contractors and saying sanctions have ended. You can sell us whatever you want. And of course, these are not naive people, but what was Iran trying to do? It was probably trying to find some greedy ones who would be willing to violate US laws because they're not ending. But what happens when they go to China and Turkey and other places where there's a real interest in making the sale? And so you have Iran pushing against the whole structure of the Security Council on procurement, the procurement channel, trying to find ways to buy what it needs, backed up by statements that they're not going to abide by the UN Security Council resolution on
David,
missiles.
if I can correct you there, I think this came up at your panel last week, Kelsey, that the new resolutions that go into effect, the new UN resolutions that go into effect after implementation day, do not bar Iran
Yes, they do.
from missile launches.
Yeah, and Adam even said it this morning. I think it was said at the hearing today. No, the administration,
well,
Ambassador Moe.
I think the language changes.
is
Instead
weaker.
of mandating Iran not to do it, it calls upon
Yeah,
Iran
well, that's seen
not
as
to
banning.
launch.
Yeah, ask
Calls upon
Ambassador
Iran?
Moe. He testified this morning.
It's about the warhead. It's
Yeah.
not the warhead. It is not about conventional
Yeah, there's
missiles.
some language there that is different.
Yeah,
That
it's
says warheads, or they're not supposed to test missiles that are designed to be nuclear
Yeah.
capable. And that language is slightly different from 1929. So it's unclear if the Security Council will use the traditional missile technology control regime definition, because I think it does leave some space, unfortunately, for Iran to say a missile that it's testing is not designed to be nuclear capable, even if it is nuclear capable from a capacity perspective.
Yeah, and ask Ambassador Moe, because he testified this morning that it would ban.
It would ban.
It would be in violation.
Okay,
And so
okay.
again, what Kelsey says is true, and I think, and I'm no missile expert, so I'm not going to, and not a legal expert, so I'm just repeating what I've heard. But the point is that the pushing on the envelope is happening, and that's it came up today in the hearing, and I think it's going to continue to come up, and we'll see what the administration does.
I just have to say that I totally disagree with that assessment.
Which part?
Almost all of it. So I don't think the PMD is pushing back on anyone and should be taking as signaling that
No,
they intend to.
what he said, that it was, they said they wouldn't
Yeah, that this
move
is
forward
that this
until
is
they closed the
because
file.
they see the PMD as part of all this, right? This is heavily invested, regardless of the words in the JCPOA. Certainly, the Iranians see.
JCPOA doesn't say close the file.
Right. Well, this is the point I'm trying to make, which is that the Iranians view the PMD file as part and parcel of this entire complex of issues. They don't see it as separate. So it's not surprising that they wanted to see that they were going to get something before they're going forward. But to say that that's evidence of bad faith and that the missile thing is evidence of bad faith, we could have an hour-long discussion on the missile thing right now. I'm willing to say, just in summary form, this is a nuclear agreement. It's not a missile agreement. The missile stuff is tangential. It was always tangential. Iran has been the subject to attack by ballistic missiles by other countries in the region, Iran-Iraq war. I'm pretty sure they're going to continue working on a missile program. But this is not about the missiles. It's not about illicit procurement. It's about nuclear procurement, nuclear weapons, nuclear program.
Yes, it's
and we need to know what the center of gravity
Yeah,
is,
but-
or we're going to get pulled off.
Jim, that's not true.
I
it's
don't
with
want to
the
debate
security-
between you two.
and-
Hussein,
and
make
also-
a quick
and I
comment.
didn't
We're
use
going
the
to have
term
another.
bad faith. I said
Okay,
to push
okay.
against an envelope, and there is
Okay.
a difference. I mean, I see Iran is really pushing its interests, and now is the U.S. going to push its?
Okay, David?
And
David.
bad faith is your choice.
That was my choice.
Point was made. Hussein, you wanted to add something?
Jim mentioned about history. Iranians have been attacked with hundreds of missiles, 1,800 by Iraqis, tens of thousands of Iranians they have been killed. Nevertheless, it has everything to do the missile capability to two issues. First of all, it is about conventional. It is not really about weapons of mass destruction. Iran has done every year missile tests during many past years, and they would do every year in the future. But the reality is that how, from the Iranian security point of view, is vital. The Iranian conventional arm capability as a balance, because the US is importing tens of billions of dollars of sophisticated conventional arms to Iranian neighbors. Therefore, you need to understand Iran has to keep its conventional arms capability and power extremely powerful for the balance of power in the region. It is really different argument. We should not bring it to the nuclear.
Okay. Paul?
Hi, Paul Carroll from the Plowshares Fund, and this entire event, this entire day has been excellent, and looking forward to more. I wanted to get at something that several of you talked about, which is sort of intent and less about technical verification issues, but it comes back to that ultimately. One conversation I had, I think when we were up hearing from President Rouhani near the UN back in October, Iran invested an awful lot of time and effort to get to this agreement. I mean, they were coerced to the table via sanctions and so on, but they worked really, really hard. And so one might say, why would they cheat now? Now, that's no argument for not verifying, not monitoring, and so on, but I want to ask your response to that question and what's behind your response. I mean, do you have some comfort about that, or do you just say, yeah, whatever, I'm still focused on X, Y, and Z?
I mean, you know, I think that what we're talking about here is ambiguities in the agreement, ambiguities in the NPT, ways in which Iran will try to profit from those ambiguities to continue conventional weapons acquisitions and so on. But I think that's a very good question. Why would Iran violate the terms of the deal in terms of its nuclear obligations? So maybe I'll just pose it to everyone, starting down at the end and moving forward.
To understand really, it was really the impact of sanctions or not. I believe the US would continue to say it was sanctions brought Iran to negotiation table. They would say forever, ever. But the fact is, definitely sanctions harm Iran, no doubt about it. Reaching below 5% before sanctions, after sanctions, it reaching to 20%. One enrichment site before sanctions, after sanctions, 2 enrichment sites. Every increase on sanctions, Iran increased the capability until 2013, which we had, first of all, a political change in Iran, election. Second, the US understood Iran has just 3 months to break out. They have resisted the sanctions. They would resist the sanctions for another 3 months, even 3 years, but they would pass breakout. And the US would have to negotiate with Iran after breakout. It was not really the sanctions. Definitely sanctions harm Iran. But one more important about the Iranian intention. Compare the JCPOA principles. 2013, 2014, 2015, every agreement, the final one. With the proposal we gave when I was nuclear negotiator in March 2005, before sanctions. It was Khatami period. Rouhani was top nuclear negotiator. The principles, Paul, are the same. Iran proposed the same proposal in 2005, the principles. We proposed below 5%. It was not imposed to Iran. We first proposed Iran not to have reprocessing for many, many years. It was not imposed. It was Iranian, all these limits was proposed first by Iranians in 2005, before sanctions. The reason we failed, it was the zero enrichment policy of the US. The reason we could make the deal, it was the shift in US policy from zero enrichment to zero nuclear bomb. It is really the reality. Otherwise, we could make the same deal in 2005. Not having 9,000 kilogram of stockpile. That time we had 100 or 200. And everybody now is discussing about 20. Who caused it? Iranians, they knew if they stopped their nuclear program, they would increase the sanctions. Therefore, to bring the US to negotiation table, they have to increase the capacity and the level.
So on this question, I would disaggregate it into two sets of questions. So the first question is it reasonable to be concerned about cheating, and should we pursue maximum verification? And on that set of questions, I would say, yes, of course it's reasonable to be concerned about Iranian cheating. I mean, I think the secret facilities, Natanz, Fordo, the others are cause enough, in addition to whatever was withheld. And plus we have, I believe, what is in the public domain that suggests that Iran had a nuclear weapons effort that they halted in 2003. So it's not unreasonable to be concerned or suspicious going forward. And whether we were or we weren't concerned, we would want to have robust verification, because we want to do that to ensure that there would be no problems, and to send messages to other countries that might consider a nuclear weapons program in the future, and approve this standard of verification so that hopefully it can be emulated elsewhere. There's a separate empirical question, policy question. Do we think Iran's going to cheat? Not should we be concerned, not should we verify, but do we think they're going to cheat? And there I think we need to rely on evidence, and we need to rely on logic. So as an empiricist, the evidence I first look to is, well, what's the history of nuclear agreements? Do they tend to be successful, or do they tend to fail? I think when you look at this history, this is one of the shocking aspects of American history, international history, is the degree to which agreements have been an unbelievable success. Even weak agreements. The NPT had no enforcement mechanism. The NPT did not regulate nuclear material. The NPT, on and on. Not a great agreement, actually. But worked out really well. Was incredibly effective beyond the particular provision. So I think there's a real track record of success that should give people some assurance. Remember that these are agreements that are not imposed, but negotiated voluntarily by sovereign states. Right? If it was the one that was imposed, I'd be much more doubtful about it, because the other side's going to constantly be trying to get out of it. No, this is a situation with both sides expect to get benefits. And if they get those benefits, then I think this agreement will be sustainable and will be as successful as all the ones in the past. The logical argument, and it alludes to something that Barbara had made earlier, frankly, in my view, if a state wants to become a nuclear weapons state and it's determined to do so, it will become a nuclear weapons state. It is political will that is the most important determinant. As someone who studies nuclear weapons decision making, it's political will that's the most important determinant of nuclear outcomes. And frankly, I think Iran already has what it wants. I think Iran made a capability decision. It didn't make the bomb decision. It wanted to be able to be in a position where it could make a bomb. It was up against it and it had to. Well, it's got that. That horse is out of the barn. They know how to build a centrifuge. They know how to build 19,000 of them. And so sanctions are no sanctions. Sanctions be damned. If they really felt like someone was coming after them, they would do it. But that's not the situation we face. No one expects that to be the situation. And so I think we're in this zone where people have bought in. There's no pressing need for them to cross that line. And hopefully bolstered by robust verification that will encourage that, this will follow the path of other successful nuclear agreements. So should we be suspicious? Sure. Should we have robust verification? Yes. Should we expect or bet that the agreement will fail? No.
Okay, go.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jim. I mean, there are two parts to verification. One is you're worried about the cheating, and Iran has a history of cheating. I mean, it violated its safeguards agreement, enriched uranium in secret. It worked on nuclear weapons. I mean, it built enrichment plants in secret. So it has a history of cheating, and the idea was to create the verification regime with that in mind. But the other part of it is to build confidence that compliance is happening. And that's why the IAEA visits old nuclear weapons sites in South Africa. It has no suspicion that South Africa is going to try to build a bomb. They also do it in Taiwan. Taiwan had a nuclear weapons program, and they've gone back to visit these sites that the U.S. largely ordered shut down by Taiwan, one of which was a soon-to-be-finished plutonium separation plant, a test site for nuclear weapons components. So, I mean, again, we don't think Taiwan will build a bomb, but we want to know that, have confidence. The other part of this is not the NPT. I mean, well, let me put it this way. It's like the original NPT. It has a life. And in terms of the nuclear constraints, the critics, and on this I agree with them, it's too short. When I had many discussions, we had workshops with U.S. officials back in the fall of 2013 on the duration, or at least that was a major issue. The expectation is the deal would last 20 or more years. And it doesn't. It really lasts 10 years. And the Europeans that I've talked to put it well. You know, the constraints are good the first 10 years. Years 10 through 13 are preparing for industrial deployment of centrifuges. And after year 13, you have full-scale industrial deployment of centrifuges. After year 15, there's no constraints anymore on the enriched uranium level. And so the breakout time can plummet down toward days within a few years. And so if the regional tensions haven't been dealt with, and again, that's outside this agreement. Mm-hmm. So if you're just thinking of nuclear, you have to worry that this is a temporary deal that doesn't actually last that long. And then you throw in the ballistic missile development that they could, if the tensions are bad, they could build nuclear weapons then, and they'll be able to mount on an ICBM that could target the United States because we didn't stop their ballistic missile program. Yeah. So I think, stepping outside of the verification issues, you have to worry that the deal itself isn't going to solve this problem.
Yeah. I'm going to give the last word to Kelsey, but let me just say that 10 years is an eternity in the Middle East. There may be a new supreme leader in Iran. We don't know whether Syria will exist as a state. We have, there are a lot of uncertainties ahead. And so to buy 10 or 15 years of no nuclear weapons in Iran seems, anyway, to me, to be a pretty good deal. Kelsey, you get the last word on this because we are running out of time.
Well, I would agree with you, Barbara, that 10 years is a long time if we use it correctly. And one of the concerns that I have is that we, having accomplished this deal, the deal being implemented, we don't think further about what we can do in the region to more fully implement some of the measures of the deal. Iran has said they'd be willing to agree to 3.67% enrichment more permanently if other countries in the region were willing to do that. Let's use this time to test that. Iran has said they may be willing to agree to some of the more intrusive monitoring and verification, again, if it were regionally tested. Let's use that time to pursue that, because I think that there certainly could be progress there. But back to your original question about cheating, I think that cheating is a word that probably is going to be thrown around a lot if there are violations of the deal. But it will be very important to look carefully at whether or not the action is something that sort of may be supported by the larger Iranian establishment. Is this a scientist continuing some computer modeling that, while unhelpful, maybe isn't necessarily an intention to violate the deal? Is this Iran having 301 kilograms instead of 300? not helpful, but again, not probably an intention to violate the deal. So I think it will be very careful to look at that closely to try and discern whether or not this is part of an Iranian attempt that's more organized to push the boundaries, or whether or not these are just separate instances. And regardless, they need to be responded to. But I think that the response can vary in terms of what is done. And the ballistic missiles, I think, will certainly fall into that. I think Iran will continue to test ballistic missiles. I think that it is extremely unhelpful. But the U.S. has steps that it can take if we're that concerned about ballistic missile testing. I mean, if you look at ballistic missile program development, areas like interdictions have been far more successful in stemming ballistic missile advancement than sanctions in many cases. And the United States has a number of tools that it can employ that it has, I think, in some ways neglected of late if we want to see areas like that. The Proliferation and Security Initiative, updates to the missile technology control regime, the training of officials within the region to look at areas related to export controls to prevent those inputs from coming in. I think those are all areas where the U.S. can and should do more.
Very good. I want to thank you all so much. If you have more questions, I encourage you to come up and ask the panelists. And I believe lunch is outside. And next will be Steve Mull. Thank you.